Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast where we try to make sense of complex issues of religion and state in Israel. And today, protecting Israel's democracy in the name of Judaism. Over the past 2 years, Israel has been governed by the most extreme government in its history, one that threatens the very values we hold dear: equality for all, tolerance and respect, pluralism and freedom. This government is causing so much damage and has made its mission to dramatically weaken the judiciary, causing a severe blow to our democracy. We all know that democracy is not just about the rule of the majority. Other fundamental principles are the separation of powers and the protection of human rights, especially minority rights. Those who protect the rights of all of us are the courts. We can all find ourselves in a position of a minority in need of protection. But the Israeli government is ignoring this and moving speedily to undermine Israeli democracy. And unfortunately, we see similar threats to democracy these days in the United States. What sets the situation in Israel apart is that the government, dominated by religious and ultra-Orthodox parties, seeks to implement its dangerous policies in the name of Judaism. This government is actively undermining democracy, abandoning the hostages, weakening the judiciary, and threatening our rights, all while claiming to do so in the name of our Jewish heritage. The government's premise is that liberal values like equality, tolerance, and pluralism are incompatible with Judaism, but this claim is simply not true. From the very first day of this government's formation in December of 2022, the Israeli Reform movement has been at the forefront of the pro-democracy protest against the judicial coup. For the first 9 months of 2023, we stood in the streets alongside hundreds of thousands of Israelis. We brought a unique voice to the protest, demonstrating under the slogan, "We protect Israeli democracy in the name of Judaism." Because what this government is doing is not only undemocratic, it is also profoundly un-Jewish. For 9 months, we prayed with our feet, as Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel put it when he marched alongside Dr. Martin Luther King in Selma in 1965. For many years, Israelis have been conditioned to associate Judaism with the rigid, exclusionary version of Orthodoxy. When presented with such a narrow vision of Jewish identity, many felt alienated toward their Judaism and simply turned away. But this has changed dramatically. Today, more and more Israelis understand that there is more than one way to be Jewish and that one can be both Jewish and liberal. During the first 9 months of 2023, we witnessed an unprecedented awakening of Israel's liberal public. People took to the streets to defend the values we have been promoting for many years. We have long known that the majority of Israelis support equality and religious freedom, but until 2023, this majority remained silent. For the first time, during the pro-democracy protest, liberal Israelis stepped forward to take responsibility for our democracy. But they also took responsibility for our Judaism. This was powerfully evident in the events of Yom Kippur over the past 2 years. The confrontations over public prayer in Tel Aviv's public square were difficult, but they reflected a deeper shift in Israeli society. The liberal public is no longer willing to let extremists dictate how Judaism should be expressed. For years, the Reform movement has offered Israelis a different kind of Judaism, one that embraces full equality between men and women, extends a hand to those in need, welcomes diverse families of all genders, and advances social justice and tikkun olam. Today, we will discuss how the Israeli government has presented an extreme, distorted version of Judaism, why Judaism is not opposed to democracy, equality, and tolerance, but rather the opposite, and how Reform Judaism offers a meaningful alternative for Israeli society. I'm honored to welcome Rabbi Talia Avnon-Benveniste, head of the Rabbinical Seminary at the Hebrew Union College. The Israeli Rabbinical School is a center for the spiritual and professional training of Reform Judaism, and it is the largest institution for pluralistic rabbinical ordination in Israel today. Talia, hi, and thank you for coming.
Hi, shalom.
It's great to have you here. So let's start by telling us just a little bit about yourself, and specifically, how did you become a Reform rabbi?
So it's interesting because we're having this conversation in both Hebrew and English, and it's probably the story that I will say now is different than the one I've said while saying this in Hebrew. I think growing up here as Israeli, and I'm a native-born Israeli. I grew up in a kibbutz, and the kibbutzim, for people who might think this is not a secular society, it's a very closed and immersed Jewish community. There are many of the holidays, the texts, the rituals We're very much oriented in Jewish traditions, maybe not religion, but in Jewish tradition and in Jewish culture. But growing up, there was something that was missing for me, and that was the fact that I needed to speak directly to God. But I had no language. I didn't know what a prayer book looked like. I didn't have the words. I didn't have the wisdom of our tradition, and I didn't have the approach of how to speak directly and say words of prayer. I knew I wanted to ask for many things. I wanted to wish for many things to happen in the world and for myself and for my family, but there was really no gate that allowed me to translate my desires of the heart in a format of Jewish tradition. And the first time I realized there is a way, there is a language, there is spirituality in our tradition was actually when I traveled to the States and met Jewish congregations in North America. And they spoke beautifully in a spiritual language that later on I was able to translate to my own language here in Israel and to use it in my own practice. So my gateway to liberal Judaism was actually through, just like we know for many stories of Israelis, through the gates of JFK. We had needed to go to the States in order to come back here and become liberal Jews.
Yeah, and I think it is really a story that is common to many Israelis, getting a lot of inspiration for dear friends, brothers and sisters in the States and elsewhere in the world. And as I mentioned in the beginning, for many years, really, Judaism here was perceived by Israelis in a very narrow way as either Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox Judaism, often with an exclusionary approach toward women, LGBTQ plus individuals, and non-Jews. And over the past 2 years, this perception has only intensified. Today, we are witnessing an extreme mutation of Judaism, one that was once rejected outright, but is now, horrifyingly, being legitimized and used as a tool to erode democracy. And my question to you is this Judaism? Is this your Judaism? How can we, deal with this kind of situation?
I think we need to be wise. I think we need to grow in our Jewish knowledge. The only way that we can deal with threats from home is growing in knowledge of Jewish heritage and Jewish sources. And I think that's the tool that it's not close to some of us or to many of us in this society. I think most of our sources are still closed in closets that are far away from secular society, and they don't have any approach to them. This is why Judaism right now is being taught and being lectured by people who have very different views about life than us. The more we engage with our sources, the more we become knowledgeable, the more we will be able to speak in our own Jewish values through texts, through Jewish sources, and to reclaim Judaism. I think we do have responsibility in doing so. I mean, we have an historical responsibility. If we will allow Judaism to be held only by extremists, I fear that our society will be eventually diminished by our own Jews. People will stay away from Judaism. People will stay away from everything that symbolized views and opinions that are far from the way that we live our life. And we will eventually feel so departed from our own Judaism that in years to come, our grandchildren will know nothing about who they are. So it's upon us to educate ourselves, to educate our children, to educate our communities, and to claim back Judaism that was taken from us by the country, by extremists, and to return it close to our hearts.
And I think, like you said, a lot of Israelis discover liberal Judaism when they go outside of Israel, although we have a very vibrant and flourishing Israeli reform movement here in Israel. But still, to this day, many Israelis are unaware or lack the basic knowledge of liberal Judaism and the fact that they have an alternative. And in order to create lasting change, like you said, it is upon us to do so, and it's clear that the key is education, right? We have to educate Israelis of all ages that things could be different and that the version that this government is presenting to Israelis is definitely not the only version or our Judaism or the Judaism that many liberal Israelis could relate to. And a few months ago, we both spoke to a group of high school students in Jerusalem, and we were both stunned by how little they knew about liberal Judaism and by how their thinking was so rigid. And I was deeply impressed by how you managed to open their minds by helping them see that Reform Judaism is about renewal within tradition, not a break from it. And I wanted to ask you, how do you think we can do this? How we can shift the public perception and let Israelis understand there are more ways to be Jewish, and Judaism is not something that contradicts democracy, but quite the opposite?
I think the young people that we met a few weeks ago and the people that we meet everywhere, all together as human beings, we're seeking for meaning. There is so much that has been taken from us these last few years, specifically after October 7th, and we are trying to make reasons in the world that we are living now, and we don't have the tools to do so. One of it is because of the tremendous effect of these big events on our lives, and that many of the values that we felt so close to have neglected us and maybe betrayed us. And at this time in our lives, and this time in this chapter of history, where we are all seeking for something to bring us back to the core of beliefs that we've maybe lost. Young people and older people and people that we associate all the time don't feel that they have the sources of understanding of the meaning in Judaism. And I think overall the solution is always education. And I think it's not only education in schools, it's not only education in regular forms of education formats, but it's basically taking upon the entire country and saying the whole country needs to go through a process of re-education itself on Jewish sources, on Jewish values. And I think it's true for all denominations in Israel. It's not just for the secular or for the liberals. I think everyone needs to be re-educated about what Judaism is. Some of the core values have lost. People in our government who are speaking like they have no rooted Judaism values in their hearts, they needed to be re-educated in what Judaism is. So I think one of the challenges that we can do together, this whole country needs to re-embrace the knowledge of what we are all here to do, and that is to build the most appreciated society. And this is something that once this dark episode will end, we will be able to engage with all of our agencies and to say, let's build this country just like we dreamed and make sure this time it will survive.
I completely agree, and you said that the ones who maybe need the most education are members of our government, and really one of the most disturbing aspects of this moment for me is that some of the strongest opponents of the efforts to free the hostages are members of the religious nationalist parties in the government, specifically the Religious Zionism Party and the extremist party Otzma Yehudit, Jewish Strength. And I want to ask you, how does this approach, how is it aligned with Jewish values that we should believe in life, should choose life, should seek the redemption of captives? How do you make sense of this?
I don't. It really doesn't make sense, and I'm not trying to make any reason in these people's opinions, because I think it's beyond what is wrong in Judaism. I think it has nothing to do with Judaism. I think it's what is wrong in their souls. I think their soul is currently damaged. And the way they're using their agencies in putting out these messages is something that I cannot understand. It's something I don't wish to understand. I think they are corrupting the soul of the nation. I think the responsibility that is given to them and not taken by them is something that we will pay as a society for many, many years to come. And the fact that not every Jew and not every human being is standing in this collective call to bring the hostages home as soon as possible is something that is beyond Judaism. It's where people just don't understand that we are giving this life in order to live them and to make other people's life happen. And if someone is willing to take someone else's life over another group, I think this is beyond the boundaries of Judaism.
I completely agree. And going back to the question whether democracy is in the basis of Judaism. I want to ask you, about the judicial coup and the government's push for unrestricted power based on Judaism. I want to remind our listeners, of course, that Judaism has always presented a variety of opinions. There are many faces to the Torah. And I want to ask you, are there Jewish sources that speak specifically about the need for checks and balances, the need to distribute the power rather concentrated in order to protect the rights of all of us?
I think all Jewish sources talk about the one value that it says, if you own any kind of possession, you need to share it with others. It could be a cultural possession, it could be the Torah, it could be knowledge, it could be assets, it could be real estate, it could be fields, it could be money. Everything you own, you need to make sure that other people will have access to it. I think that's the root basic of Jewish values. Judaism does not like when force is being used for one entity or by one person. I think when people hold possessions, according to Judaism, they are about to be self-destroyed. We say this in the Babylon temple, okay? In the Babylon tower, okay? You cannot reach the sky. It's not up to you to have force or mighty strength on this planet. You need to make sure that your life is horizontal, okay? That is spread out among people, among communities. Too much power will eventually destroy the society that you are currently in. So I think the one message that our Jewish sources are trying to teach us is whatever it is that you have, use it for your self good, but make sure that others will be able to enjoy it as well.
We speak about presenting Israelis with a different kind of Judaism, but I think it carries a tremendous significance to our brothers and sisters abroad in the U.S. I think the connection of liberal Jews in the diaspora to Israel is based on the fact that we offer a different kind of Judaism, and we strive toward an Israel that lives up to the dream of our founders, of a really democratic and pluralistic society. You are the head of the rabbinical school here in Israel, and we have other campuses of the Hebrew College in North America. What do you think is the part of this struggle in the connection between Israelis, between Jews in Israel and Jews in the diaspora?
I think there are two missions. One is to make Israel a place for all Jews to be engaged with, not necessarily live here, but Israel to be the largest Jewish community that everyone feels belong. And that mission is not only upon Israelis, and it's not only upon the government, whoever the government might be, it's among all Jewish people. I think there's about 15 million Jews around the world now. That's probably not an accurate number, but I think all of us are responsible for that mission, that the largest Jewish community in the world, which is located in Israel, in Zion, will be the community that has the ability to reflect all of our beliefs, all of our values, and to inspire us in our Jewish life. I think that's one mission. I think the second mission is to save our souls. I think our souls currently are being threatened by the threats in the world. I think anti-Semitism is something that we as Israelis know less about than our peers in Israel all over the world. But I think that we need to save our souls from the fear of being destroyed again. And that is also a responsibility that Israel has for Jews outside of Israel. And it's something that we need to keep and protect ourselves together from the threat that's been part of our lives. Probably we're coming towards close to Purim. That's like another very historical, ancient demonstration of anti-Semitism. And then here we are, thousands of years later, with the same threat. And at this time in our history, our mission as the Jewish people is to make sure that we are saved. and that we are strong, and that we can go through this time of threats around us better than what we did or could have in the past.
At the same time, here in Israel, as we are have sovereignty here, we need to be very careful in how we use our power towards groups, marginalized groups in Israeli society, and think that's sort of a mirror picture to what's happening outside of Israel. And I remember during the pro-democracy protest, Rabbi Rick Jacobs gave a speech at Tel Aviv rally in front of 250,000 Israelis, and he said that how Israel treats minorities here could affect how the Jewish minority is treated outside of Israel. So I think here we are sort of presented with a different challenge within our sovereign state that is very different from ancient times when we were not sovereign.
Sovereignty teaches us responsibility. If you have sovereignty, you need to be responsible for people who are living close to you in your own land and people who are engaged with you who are not in your own, sharing the same land that you are. Sovereignty, what it means, whoever holds that possession, whoever holds that agency, the only translation that I understand from it is being responsible, not only for yourself, for people who are close to you. So I think this government needs to be responsible for all Jews and needs to be responsible for all inhabitants living in Israel, despite their religions and their identity. And that's the only thing that sovereigns need to do. They need to take care of the people who are under their responsibility.
Unfortunately, our government have forgotten this very important mission. We've gone through really difficult things over the last 2 years. Since the government's inception, of course, the judicial coup, and then October 7th and the really horrible war that followed. And I want to ask you whether at this specific time, when Israelis are, on the one hand, appalled by the extreme version of Judaism that the government is presenting, and on the other hand, are in search, like you said, of meaning and spirituality, does this present like a different opportunity for people maybe to find liberal Judaism, maybe people that have not thought of this before? Maybe we can give them the spiritual needs that they need at the moment?
I think in the rallies that happened in the few months before October 7th, if we were listening to what people were fighting for and the language they used the language of liberal Judaism. And most Israelis, as I know Israel, are liberal Jews. They're not all engaged with Reform Judaism or the Reform movement, but most of them are liberal Jews, and they're seeking for the language of liberal Judaism. It was here before October 7th. It's very, very strong now. We see it in every corner of every street of every city. People are seeking for meaning. They're seeking for spirituality to take care of their broken souls. And you see our rabbis all over taking care of people's needs for some soul repair. And the demand is growing. And I think that we are in the right path of bringing liberal Judaism to Israel in the way that we will be engaged naturally with Israelis.
I completely agree. I want to ask you whether you see a difference between the time that you studied to be a rabbi quite a while ago, how Israelis reacted to the fact that you are a Reform rabbi, and how people react today, and maybe how the students that you teach at the HUC, how they are perceived today in contrary to, how people reacted to you when you first became a rabbi. Do you see a difference?
I see it different, and it's in a very positive direction. When I first started going to rabbinical school, it was probably around 25 years ago, and it was in the first years after Rabin's assassination. And the Israeli society was then broken, but broken in different ways. And people wanted to get close. People wanted to find center in Judaism for the Israeli society to be united. And there was opportunity to get closer. I think that process has not ended, and we are still looking for ways to find a center for us to be united around. But when I used to say to people that I'm going to rabbinical school, then people would say, like, it was kind of like a new concept. And people had so many questions about it. And they wanted to learn what Reform Judaism is and what do you study in rabbinical school and what does it mean to be a Reform rabbi. And it was not a familiar concept. Today, when I speak to people and I say I'm a Reform rabbi, people are very familiar with the concept. Their cousin, is a Reform rabbi, whether here in Israel. They've been to a Reform bar mitzvah, they've been to a Reform synagogue, they've been to a Reform wedding, they've seen rabbis, on the media, they've met with rabbis. Their encounter with Reform Judaism here in Israel or outside of Israel, and it's a much closer concept. So it's not exotic anymore. It's much more, the feeling and the response is very warm. And I feel that people now would like to be led by our leaders.
That's a very positive message. And I want to end by asking you that if you look ahead, are you optimistic? We need some optimism. Give it to us.
I'm very optimistic. First of all, as Jews, what we have is hope. That's our hymn. That's our anthem. That's the only word that I think if all words will be, thrown away from the language, the only one I would fight to stay is hope. And because it symbolizes our spirit. It symbolizes everything we went through and everything that's ahead of us. And also thinking about Israel that is now in its mid-70s or late 70s, we need to remember that even though it's a very young country, the concept of being here is a very old. And it's a concept of hope. We are never there in Judaism. We are always walking.
Towards something.
Towards something. In ancient Hebrew, it's interesting, there is only two time phrases. There is always past and there is always future. In modern Hebrew, the concept of past has immersed tremendously. We don't have the past so much. We don't really know much about the future. We only have the present. But in our sources, the concept of always going towards somewhere is something that we live by, whether we know it or we don't know it. And the fact that we are here after going through many destructions in our history, and we are going through a destruction currently, the only thing that keeps us together, the only thing that keeps us walking is the understanding that destructions build better societies. So we will build a better Israel, we will build a better Judaism, a much stronger one, and we will remain hopeful people.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And I want to end with a beautiful passage that you wrote that's going back to the beginning of our conversation about the fact that you grew up in the kibbutz. And you wrote, "We tend to imagine kibbutzim as places where at the front gate, a yellow security barrier keeps outsiders away, and a guard stands asking, 'Are you religious? Are you secular?' only opening the gate for those who answer correctly. But the truth is, there were no faith tests in the acceptance process to the kibbutz, and no one was labeled by the relationship to God. God wasn't left outside, but neither was a special seat reserved for him inside. People worked the land, took turns tending the fields, and on Friday nights they lit candles and sang beautiful songs, quoting verses from the Bible. On Yom Kippur, they prepared a meal before the fast, and at Passover, they sang psalms. There were no strict rules forbidding belief, nor mandates requiring it. Instead, nature itself was breathtaking, and God existed in the very soil, in the sunrise over the hills, in the books in the library, in the scent of fresh-baked cakes for Shabbat, and in the children running barefoot on the grass." And then you described visiting a kibbutz a few years ago, and you wrote about the yellow security gate at the entrance. There was no guard when we arrived. It was wide open. And I thought to myself, maybe after all these years, they have realized that God doesn't need security guards. He will always find his way in. So thank you so much for that, Talia. Thank you for coming here. And thank you for everything you're doing. It's been a pleasure hosting you.
Toda rabba.
And thank you for listening. I hope to see you in our next episodes.